Picture this: the first rays of sunlight break over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the ancient marble columns of the Parthenon. It's a sight that has captivated millions for centuries, a symbol of beauty, power, and human achievement. But what if these temples are more than just stunning relics of the past? What if, hidden within their precise lines and sacred geometry, lie secrets we are only just beginning to understand? Today, we're peeling back the layers of history to explore 25 hidden meanings in ancient Greek temples, meanings that go far beyond religion and art, reaching into the realms of astronomy, mathematics, and even philosophy. These structures were not merely built to honor the gods. They were designed as living libraries of knowledge, encoded with messages meant to transcend time. The ancient Greeks saw the universe as an orderly, beautiful system, and they embedded that vision into every aspect of their architecture, from the orientation of a temple to the mathematical ratios governing its proportions. Each element served a purpose. Some temples align perfectly with celestial events, like solstices or the rising of specific stars. Others incorporate sacred geometry, such as the golden ratio, that echoes patterns found throughout nature, from seashells to galaxies. These choices weren't accidental. They were deliberate acts of genius meant to connect humanity with the cosmos. So why does this matter to us today? Because these temples remind us that our ancestors were not so different from us. They looked up at the same stars, asked the same big questions about existence, and used the tools they had to seek answers. By uncovering their hidden messages, we're not just studying history, we're rediscovering a part of ourselves. This journey will take us deep into the mysteries of these magnificent structures, revealing how something as solid and silent as stone can speak across millennia. Get ready to see these ancient wonders in a whole new light, because what we're about to explore may forever change how you think about the past and our place in the universe. Let's begin with a mathematical secret so profound, it's woven into the very fabric of the universe. Hidden meaning number 1 is the golden ratio, a number the Greeks believed to be the formula for divine beauty. This ratio, approximately 1.618, appears everywhere in nature, from the spiral of a nautilus shell to the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. It's a pattern that the human eye finds inherently pleasing, a harmony between parts and the whole, and the master builders of ancient Greece, like the sculptor Phidias who oversaw the construction of the Parthenon, intentionally embedded this sacred number into their temples. They weren't just building houses for the gods, they were creating a visual hymn to the mathematical order they saw in creation itself. Look at the Parthenon's famous facade. The ratio of its width to its height is astonishingly close to the golden ratio, but the precision goes much deeper than that. The spacing of the columns, the relationship between the height of the columns and the entablature above them, even the dimensions of the inner chamber, all of these elements are believed to be governed by this same divine proportion. The architects used a system of measurement where every part related to every other part through this ratio, creating a sense of perfect, balanced harmony that you feel intuitively, even if you don't consciously recognize the math behind it. Why go to such extraordinary lengths? For the Greeks, beauty was not a matter of subjective taste. It was an objective truth, a law of the cosmos. By building according to the golden ratio, they were aligning their work with the fundamental order of nature, which they saw as a direct reflection of the God's will. A temple built with these proportions wasn't just beautiful, it was right. It was a microcosm of the perfectly ordered universe, a physical place where humanity could connect with the divine through perfect geometry. This mathematical encoding was their way of ensuring the structure would resonate with a deeper, eternal truth, making it a truly worthy offering to Athena. The temple itself became a bridge between the earthly and the celestial, a silent sermon preached in stone and ratio. While the golden ratio shaped the earthly beauty of these temples, the Greeks also looked to the heavens for divine inspiration. This brings us to hidden meaning number 2, astronomical alignments and solstice markers. Many of these sacred structures were not randomly placed, they were meticulously positioned to interact with the cosmos. The ancient builders were master astronomers, and they designed their temples to capture specific celestial events, transforming stone and marble into giant, intricate calendars and observatories. Consider the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, one of the most important religious sites in the ancient world. It wasn't just nestled on the slopes of Mount Parnassus for its dramatic view. The temple's orientation is precisely calculated so that on specific dates, the first rays of the rising sun would stream directly through its eastern entrance, illuminating the sacred inner chamber where the oracle would deliver her prophecies. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a deliberate, awe-inspiring effect designed to showcase the sun god's power and presence at his most sacred site. On those mornings, worshippers would have witnessed a breathtaking spectacle, a beam of light, as if sent by Apollo himself, cutting through the darkness to ignite the heart of the temple. This connection between architecture and astronomy served a profound dual purpose. On a practical level, these alignments functioned as a sophisticated agricultural and religious calendar. The precise date when the sun aligned with a temple's axis would mark the changing of seasons, signaling when to plant crops, when to harvest, and when to hold major festivals in honor of the gods. It was a way of organizing society around the natural rhythms of the universe. On a spiritual level, these events created a powerful, tangible link between the worshippers on earth and the gods in the sky. By building a structure that literally captured a moment of cosmic power, the Greeks blurred the line between the earthly and the divine. The temple became a conduit, a place where heaven and earth met, if only for a few magnificent moments each year. This practice reveals a world view where humanity was not separate from the cosmos, but an active participant in its grand, orderly dance. But the Greeks didn't stop at aligning their temples with the heavens. They also encoded their deepest philosophical beliefs into the very ground plans of these sacred spaces. This brings us to our third hidden meaning, the use of sacred geometry in their floor plans. If you were to look down on these temples from above, you would see more than just a building outline. You would see a complex diagram of the Greek understanding of the universe. The architects used fundamental shapes, the circle, the square, and the triangle, not for arbitrary aesthetic reasons, but because each one carried immense symbolic weight, representing core principles of cosmic harmony and philosophical ideals. Consider the rare and fascinating Tholos temples, which were entirely circular in design. Structures like the Tholos of Delphi or the sanctuary of Athena Pronaia weren't common, which makes their unique shape all the more significant. To the Greek mind, the circle was the most perfect of all shapes. It has no beginning and no end, symbolizing eternity, divinity, and the infinite cycle of life, death, and rebirth. By constructing a temple in this form, the builders were creating a physical manifestation of perfection, a space where the divine could reside in its purest, most complete state. Walking into a Tholos would have been an immersive experience in cosmic unity, surrounded by a continuous colonnade that echoed the never-ending nature of the gods themselves. In stark contrast, the vast majority of Greek temples followed a rectangular floor plan, and this, too, was a deliberate philosophical choice. The long, rectangular cella, or inner chamber, surrounded by a colonnade of columns, was designed using precise mathematical ratios. This layout mirrored the Greek concept of cosmic order, known as cosmos, which meant a beautifully arranged and harmonious system. The rectangular form was also deeply connected to the principles of human proportion. The architect believed that a temple should reflect the ideal human form, and just as a healthy human body is symmetrical and proportioned, so too should be a temple. This idea that the microcosm of man reflects the macrocosm of the universe was physically built into the very foundations of their architecture. The floor plan itself was a silent testament to the belief that humanity, the gods, and the cosmos were all part of one interconnected, beautifully ordered whole. Now let's shift our attention from what was seen to what was heard, because the ancient Greeks understood that divine communication was a full sensory experience. This brings us to our fourth hidden meaning, the intentional use of acoustic engineering to create awe-inspiring, supernatural moments for worshippers. Far from being an accidental byproduct of their construction, the remarkable sound properties in many temples were meticulously designed. Architects exploited the science of acoustics to engineer environments where the ordinary could feel extraordinary, making the presence of the gods feel tangible and real through the very air itself. A stunning example of this can be found in the remarkable Echo Stoa, part of the sanctuary of Olympia. As the name suggests, this long, colonnaded porch possessed an acoustic anomaly so precise it seemed like magic. A person standing at one specific focal point and speaking in a normal voice could be heard with perfect clarity by someone standing at another specific point far down the structure, while those standing in between heard almost nothing. This wasn't a random echo, it was a carefully crafted whispering gallery effect. For an ancient visitor, this would have been a bewildering and profound experience. A priest's prayer or an oracle's chant, seemingly carried on the wind directly to your ear, would feel less like a human projection and more like a divine message meant for you alone. This sophisticated manipulation of sound reached its zenith inside the inner chambers of major temples like the huge temple of Zeus at Olympia. The design of the cella, or inner room, often incorporated subtle parabolic curves in the walls and ceilings. These shapes acted like modern satellite dishes, focusing sound waves. A whisper uttered at the altar could be projected and amplified, allowing it to be heard clearly by every person standing in the vast hall. Imagine the psychological impact on a congregation. The high priest, speaking in a hushed, reverent tone from the sacred altar, would have his voice filled with an unearthly resonance, seeming to emanate from the massive cult statue of the god itself. This auditory illusion transformed a simple ritual into a visceral, unforgettable event. It was proof, delivered directly through the ears, that the god was present and listening, that the barrier between the mortal and the divine was, for that moment, paper-thin. The architecture itself became a medium for the miraculous, using the invisible science of sound to solidify the faith of all who entered. Moving from the soundscapes of the temples to the very pillars that held them up, we find our fifth hidden meaning carved into stone itself. The ancient Greeks didn't just design columns to hold up a roof, they used them as a symbolic language. The three main architectural orders, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, were far more than aesthetic choices. They were a complex system of visual communication, each style embodying a distinct set of philosophical ideals and human qualities. By understanding this language, we can read a temple's intended message before we even step inside. The most robust and austere of the three is the Doric order. Look at the Parthenon, the ultimate expression of Doric design. These columns are powerful and direct, rising from the temple floor without any decorative base. Their capitals are simple, rounded stone cushions, and their shafts are often fluted with 20 shallow grooves that catch the light and create a dramatic play of shadow and strength. This wasn't just a practical design, it was a deliberate symbol of masculine power, stability, and logical order. The Doric order reflected the ideals of the Greek city-state itself, unwavering, rational, and grounded in earthly strength. It conveyed a sense of permanence and heroic virtue, embodying the solid, unshakable might of a god like Zeus or the disciplined power of Athena. In direct contrast, the Ionic order was designed to express an entirely different set of values. If Doric is strength, Ionic is grace. Originating from the coasts of Asia Minor, these columns are notably more slender and elegant. They stand on a detailed, layered base, and their most defining feature is the capital, sculpted into two beautiful spiral volutes that look like a curled scroll or a ram's horns. This graceful, flowing form was widely understood to symbolize feminine beauty, wisdom, and intellectual refinement. The scrolls themselves were often said to represent knowledge, perhaps even the scrolls of a learned scholar. Temples dedicated to deities like Hera or Artemis, who embodied these more nuanced qualities, frequently employed the Ionic order. It was architecture as a representation of sophisticated thought and elegant composure. But the Greeks didn't stop with this simple duality. They developed a third order to express an even higher concept, the Corinthian. While less common in purely Greek temples and later adopted extensively by the Romans, its invention is a story in itself. According to the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius, a sculptor was inspired by seeing a votive basket left on a young girl's grave, around which an acanthus plant had grown, its leaves curling gracefully around the basket. He captured this organic, flourishing beauty in stone, creating the Corinthian capital, an intricate basket overflowing with detailed acanthus leaves and tendrils. This design was intended to symbolize spiritual ascent, organic growth, and the flourishing of the soul. It represented a transcendence beyond the earthly strength of Doric and the intelligent grace of Ionic, pointing toward a more mystical, celestial ideal. The true genius, however, lies not in using these orders in isolation, but in how the Greeks combined them. Builders would often mix orders within a single complex to convey a sophisticated philosophical message about balance. The most famous example is the Parthenon itself. While overwhelmingly Doric on its exterior, housing the mighty statue of Athena Parthenos, it featured a magnificent Ionic frieze running along the inner wall of its cella, depicting the Panathenaic procession. This wasn't an accident or a compromise. This was a deliberate fusion. The architects were making a profound statement that the raw, heroic strength of Athens' Doric was perfectly balanced and guided by its cultural wisdom, grace, and intellectual life, Ionic. The temple itself became a stone manifesto, arguing that true greatness requires a harmony of both powerful action and refined thought. Beyond the silent language of their columns, the Greeks carved their most vital lessons directly onto the temple walls. High above the heads of worshippers, on the rectangular panels known as metopes, artists chiseled epic struggles that were far more than simple decoration. These were the comic books and moral primers of the ancient world, and our sixth hidden meaning reveals them as powerful tools for teaching civic values. Each metope presented a frozen moment of mythic conflict, a story every citizen knew, serving as a constant, visible reminder of the ideals they were expected to uphold and the chaos they were meant to overcome. Perhaps the most powerful example of this is the Parthenon's famous south metopes, which depict the violent battle between the Lapiths and the Centaurs. On the surface, it's a dramatic scene from mythology. The Centaurs, half man and half horse, invited to a Lapith wedding feast, only to become drunk and violently attempt to abduct the Lapith women. The Lapith heroes, led by their king Theseus, fight back to restore order. But for an Athenian walking past, the message was immediate and profound. This was not just an ancient skirmish, it was a timeless allegory for the eternal struggle between civilization and barbarism, between rational order and unrestrained instinct. The centaurs, with their hybrid nature, represented the dangerous, untamed forces of nature and passion that constantly threatened to overwhelm society. Their violent actions at a sacred social event, a wedding, showed how quickly chaos could erupt if the rules of civilization were disregarded. In contrast, the Lapiths stood for the Greek ideals of reason, law, and self-control. Their victory was a testament to the triumph of human order over animalistic chaos. For the citizens of Athens, a city that prided itself on being the birthplace of democracy and philosophy, these sculptures were a reinforcement of their core identity. They were a warning against internal discord and a celebration of the civilized values that made them superior to the barbarians they often fought. This architectural storytelling wasn't unique to the Parthenon. At the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, the metopes illustrated the 12 labors of Heracles. Each panel showed the hero overcoming a seemingly impossible monster or task through sheer strength, cunning, and perseverance. This narrative served a dual purpose. On one level, it was inspirational, depicting the ultimate Greek hero achieving greatness through virtue and effort. On another, it was a metaphor for the human condition itself, the constant struggle to overcome life's immense challenges through bravery and intelligence. By placing these stories on their most sacred buildings, the Greeks were encoding their entire value system into stone, ensuring that every glance upward was a lesson in what it meant to be a good citizen, a brave hero, and a civilized human being. Rising majestically above the columns, the triangular pediments of a Greek temple were its most prominent and sacred canvas. These were not merely decorative spaces to be filled with statuary. They were conceived as nothing less than a map of the entire cosmos, a grand statement of divine order set against the sky. This is our seventh hidden meaning, pediment sculptures as cosmic maps. The arrangement of figures within this perfect geometric shape was a highly deliberate act of theological storytelling, designed to visually explain the hierarchy of the universe and humanity's place within it. The composition always followed a powerful symmetry, with a central, dominant deity flanked by progressively smaller and less powerful figures, creating a visual echo of the celestial chain of command the Greeks believed governed all existence. The magnificent east pediment of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia offers a profound and complex example of this principle in action. At its center, the scene is deceptively calm. The great god Zeus himself stands, presiding over a chariot race between Pelops and King Oenomaus, an event that would found the Olympic Games. This central group represents the pinnacle of divine order and fate, with Zeus as the ultimate arbiter. Flanking him are smaller groups of figures, seers, heroes, and attendants, who are aware of the tragic outcome of the race but are powerless to change the god's decree. They represent the tiers of existence below the supreme deity, participants in a drama whose script is written by a higher power. But the true genius of this cosmic mapping is revealed on the west pediment of the same temple, which depicts the violent, chaotic battle between the Lapiths and the Centaurs. Here, the theme of order versus chaos is played out in a furious sculptural narrative. The composition is intentionally structured to mirror the cosmic hierarchy even in its tumult. At the very apex of the triangle, the god Apollo stands perfectly calm and composed, his arm outstretched. He is the central, ordering principle amidst the frenzy. His divine presence is the still point of the turning world, and his powerful gaze brings meaning to the conflict below. The battling Lapiths and Centaurs radiate out from him, their struggling forms filling the sloping sides of the pediment, becoming less distinct and more entangled as they near the corners, symbolizing the outer edges of the civilized world where chaos reigns. This was far more than a dramatic myth. It was a fundamental lesson in Greek philosophy. The pediment structure was a metaphor for the universe itself. Apollo, at the center, represents the divine logos, the rational principle that structures and orders the cosmos. The struggling figures represent the constant effort required to impose that order onto the raw, chaotic forces of nature. For a visitor to Olympia gazing up at this scene, the message was unmistakable. The gods represent eternal order, and humanity's highest calling is to emulate that order in our own lives, our cities, and our souls. The temple's facade was a constant, stone-hewn reminder that the cosmos is a balanced system, and that while chaos may erupt at the edges, divine reason will always ultimately prevail. For the ancient Greeks, the divine was not a distant concept confined to the sky. It was immanent, woven into the very landscape around them. This profound connection between earth and heaven brings us to our eighth hidden meaning, the deliberate orientation of temples toward sacred mountains. These were not just scenic backdrops. Mountains like Parnassus and Olympus were believed to be the physical dwellings of the gods themselves. places where the veil between the mortal and immortal worlds was thin. By carefully aligning their most sacred structures with these powerful landforms, Greek architects were doing more than choosing a pretty view. They were forging a permanent, visible axis between humanity and divinity, turning the entire temple into a focal point for celestial energy. Consider the awe-inspiring setting of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, perched high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus. This was no arbitrary choice. The temple was precisely oriented so that its central axis and main entrance faced directly toward the towering peak. For a worshipper approaching the sanctuary, the journey was a physical and spiritual ascent, moving ever closer to the realm of the gods. The massive, looming presence of the mountain would have been an unavoidable and humbling part of the experience, a constant visual reminder that one was entering the domain of Apollo, the god of light and prophecy. The mountain was his throne, and the temple was the receiving room at its foot. This intentional alignment transformed the act of worship into a direct dialogue with the landscape, making the divine presence feel immediate, tangible, and rooted in the very rock and earth. This practice extended beyond the mystical home of the oracle. Even in the heart of Athens, the architects of the Parthenon executed a brilliant feat of sacred geography. While the temple is famously aligned with the rising sun on Athena's birthday, its eastern facade also possesses a clear, deliberate sightline to Mount Pentelicus. This was the very mountain from which the brilliant white marble was quarried to build the temple. Think about the profound symbolism at work here. The temple literally faces its own source, the earthly womb from which it was born. This created a powerful cycle of meaning. The mountain gave its stone to honor the goddess, and the finished temple, in turn, honored the mountain by forever gazing back at it with gratitude. It visually connected the finished product of human civilization, this pinnacle of art and architecture, back to the raw, divine material provided by nature, perfectly embodying the Greek ideal of harmony between culture and the natural world. This architectural principle reveals a worldview where geography was theology. By aligning a temple with a sacred mountain, the builders were anchoring their abstract faith in the solid, unchanging reality of the earth. It was a way of grounding their worship, of making the power of Zeus or Apollo as real and permanent as the mountain itself. This orientation served as a perpetual compass needle, pointing the community's collective spiritual attention toward the source of divine power. It was a silent, stone-built prayer, a permanent gesture of reverence that ensured every glance toward the temple was also a glance toward the abode of the gods, forever linking human aspiration to the enduring majesty of the divine landscape. This mathematical genius wasn't about simple symmetry. It was a profound philosophical statement built into every block. The Greeks believed the universe itself was a cosmos, a word that means both beauty and perfect order. They saw this divine order reflected in the immutable laws of mathematics, and so, by building their temples with unerring mathematical precision, they were creating a small-scale model of the universe itself. A temple wasn't just a building, it was a microcosm, a physical echo of the celestial harmony governing the stars. This is why they went to such extraordinary lengths, using mathematical principles that wouldn't be formally written down for centuries. The most famous example is once again the Parthenon. Its design is governed by a complex ratio of 4:9. This proportion dictates the relationship between the temple's length and its width, the height of the columns to the space between them, and even the diameter of the columns to their height. This consistent application of a single ratio creates an overwhelming sense of visual harmony that you feel intuitively, but the sophistication goes even deeper. The builders incorporated subtle optical refinements that defy simple measurement. For instance, the stylobate, the platform on which the temple stands, curves upward slightly in the middle to counter the optical illusion that a perfectly flat base would appear to sag. The columns themselves are not straight, they bulge slightly in the middle, a technique called entosses, which prevents them from looking pinched and fragile under the weight of the roof. Every single one of these refinements was calculated using precise geometry. This leads to a fascinating historical puzzle. How were they doing this? The Pythagorean theorem, which is fundamental to so much of this geometry, is named for Pythagoras, who lived in the late 6th century BCE. Yet the principles it describes were clearly being applied by master builders and architects long before he formalized them. This suggests a deep, centuries-old tradition of practical mathematics passed down through guilds of builders. They understood the properties of right-angled triangles and used them to create perfect squares and alignments for their massive structures. They used sophisticated measuring tools and drawing techniques to plan every detail in advance. This wasn't guesswork, it was applied sacred science. The precision was a form of worship. By creating a structure that was perfectly ordered according to mathematical law, the builders believed they were honoring the gods by mimicking their greatest creation, the universe itself. The temple became a bridge between the fleeting imperfections of the human world and the eternal, flawless perfection of the divine realm. But the divine resonance of these temples wasn't just a visual or auditory experience, it was also channeled through the very element of life itself, water. This brings us to hidden meaning number 10, the intricate network of hidden water channels and advanced hydraulic engineering that ran beneath the sacred floors. Far from being a mere practical necessity, these subterranean systems were a profound part of the temple's spiritual technology, used to manage ritual offerings and, even more spectacularly, to create breathtaking mystical effects that blurred the line between myth and reality for every worshipper. The most brilliant example of this hydraulic genius is found on the Athenian Acropolis at the Erechtheion. This uniquely complex temple was built over the most sacred spots of Athenian foundation myths. According to legend, during the contest between Poseidon and Athena for patronage of the city, Poseidon struck the rock with his trident, causing a saltwater spring to gush forth. Athena, in turn, offered the first olive tree. To make her gift prevail, she also created a freshwater well. The entire Erechtheion was architecturally designed to enshrine these two competing divine gifts under one roof. But the architects faced a problem. How do you physically manifest a saltwater spring inside a building on top of a mountain? Their solution was a masterpiece of religious engineering. Deep beneath the temple's floor, they constructed a hidden, waterproof cistern to collect rainwater. Then they built a clever system of narrow channels and pipes. During a major ceremony, a priest could secretly release this stored water. It would flow through the channels and emerge from a specific fissure in the rock inside the temple's north porch, creating the miraculous appearance of a natural, flowing spring. For the congregation witnessing this, the effect would have been utterly convincing. They were seeing proof of the myth with their own eyes, Poseidon's saltwater spring right there in the temple. Simultaneously, in another part of the building, a separate, always functional channel provided access to the actual freshwater well, representing Athena's gift. This wasn't a cheap trick, it was a sophisticated theological tool. By engineering this hydraulic spectacle, the priests made the foundational myths of Athens physically present and tangibly real, reinforcing the city's divine right to Athena's protection and the legitimacy of its power. This practice extended beyond creating mythical springs. We have evidence from other sanctuaries, like the Oracle at Delphi, of similar hidden water channels used for a more visceral purpose, the disposal of liquid offerings. After sacrifices were made, vast quantities of wine, water, blood, and other liquids used in purification rituals had to be removed from the sacred precincts without causing a spectacle of mess. To solve this, engineers designed sloping floors with almost invisible drainage channels that would carry these offerings away from the altar and into hidden underground runoff systems. This ensured the sacred space remained ritually pure and visually pristine, maintaining the aura of divine perfection. The very practicality of this system served a higher spiritual purpose, hiding the messy mechanics of worship to preserve the illusion of effortless divine order, where impurities simply vanished into the earth as if by magic. If we could step back in time to the height of ancient Greece, the most jarring difference at a place like the Parthenon wouldn't be the lack of crowds or the smell of sacrifices. It would be the blinding, brilliant, almost shocking use of color. Our modern obsession with pristine white marble is a misconception born from centuries of weathering that stripped away all traces of paint. In reality, these temples were a riot of symbolic color, and every single hue was chosen with immense care for its spiritual and psychological power. This is our 11th hidden meaning, a sophisticated language of color symbolism that transformed these stone structures into vibrant, living proclamations of faith. Blue was arguably the most sacred and expensive color, reserved for the most divine elements, created from crushed lapis lazuli or a copper-based Egyptian blue pigment. Its rarity and cost meant it was used sparingly but powerfully. You would have seen it highlighting the backgrounds of pediment sculptures, painting the details of a god's robes, or even coloring the stone coffers of the ceiling. This deep, celestial blue was a direct visual link to the heavens. It represented the divine ether, the realm of the gods, and the boundless sky that was the home of Zeus. By framing a statue of Athena in this color, the artists were visually announcing her celestial nature, setting her apart from the mortal world in a halo of sacred pigment. In stark contrast, red ochre was the color of earthly vitality, the life force, and even the blood of sacrifice. This warm, abundant, and readily available pigment made from iron-rich clay was used extensively on backgrounds, on the trunks of columns to make them stand out against the landscape, and on the details of metopes. Its presence was a constant reminder of the mortal realm, of the energy and passion of human life, and of the blood ties that bound the community together through ritual. When used alongside the celestial blue, it created a powerful visual dialogue, the red of humanity reaching upward toward the blue of the divine, a color story of aspiration painted across the entire temple facade. And then there was gold, the ultimate symbol of immortality and incorruptible divinity. While actual gold leaf was sometimes applied to statues like the famed Athena Parthenos, a brilliant yellow ochre often stood in as a symbolic representation. This radiant color was used for hair, weapons, armor, and divine attributes. Gold didn't tarnish or fade, it was eternal. By painting a god's attributes with this color, the artists were making a statement about their timeless, unchanging, and immortal nature. The effect in the bright Mediterranean sun would have been dazzling, making the gods seem to shine with their own inner light, literally glowing against the vibrant red and blue backgrounds. This chromatic scheme wasn't just for show, it was a form of visual theology that guided the worshipper's eye and mind. The strategic placement of these colors created a clear visual hierarchy. The most divine elements, painted in celestial blue and brilliant gold, would draw the eye upward, pulling the viewer's focus toward the pediments and the roof, the parts of the temple closest to the sky. The more earthly elements, in reds and other earthly tones, anchored the structure to the ground. This created a subconscious journey for the viewer from the mortal realm at their feet to the immortal realm above their heads. The temple itself became a ladder of color, a visual pathway designed to lift the spirit from the concerns of the earth toward the contemplation of the eternal. It was a full sensory immersion into a world where every shade had meaning, and the entire universe could be understood through a brilliantly painted palette of sacred stone. This intricate dance between perception and reality brings us to a principle that lies at the very heart of Greek architectural genius, the belief that a beautiful building should reflect the ideal human form. This is our 12th hidden meaning, the profound proportional relationship between temple dimensions and the human body. The Greeks didn't see architecture as separate from humanity, they saw it as its ultimate expression. Their temples were not cold, impersonal monuments, but were conceived as colossal, perfected human figures cast in stone, with every element from the overall proportion down to the slightest curve in a column serving to embody the balance, tension, and grace of a living being. This philosophy is most explicitly clear in the very terminology they used. The Roman architect Vitruvius, who recorded much of the Greek knowledge that came before him, explicitly states that the Doric column was designed to imitate the proportions, strength, and beauty of the male body. He even provides a detailed comparison. Just as a man's foot is 1/6 of his height, so too is the height of a Doric column supposed to be 6 times its diameter at the base. This created a sense of powerful, grounded stability. The Ionic order, with its more slender and elegant proportions, was similarly compared to the graceful form of a woman, with its base representing sandals and the volutes of its capital suggesting curled hair. This wasn't just a poetic fancy, it was a literal design manual. The temple was a body, and the architects were its sculptors, using mathematical ratios to achieve a perfect, idealized anatomy. Nowhere is this mimicry of life more brilliantly subtle than in the application of entosses, that slight, almost imperceptible swelling in the middle of a column. If you were to run your hand up the shaft of a Parthenon column, you would feel it bulge outward gently before tapering again toward the top. For centuries, this was thought to be a simple correction for an optical illusion, preventing perfectly straight columns from appearing to bend inward under the weight of the structure. And while that is true, the reason goes much deeper. The ancient builders were students of nature, and they observed that in a living, standing body there is always a subtle tension. A muscular arm or leg is never a perfectly straight, stiff line. It swells with life and potential energy. By incorporating entosses, the architects were injecting that same living tension into their stone. A column with entosses doesn't just stand, it bears weight. It appears to breathe, to strain slightly against the load it carries, full of the same dynamic energy as an athlete poised for action. This prevented the building from looking static or dead. It created the impression that the entire temple was a moment frozen in time, a structure thrumming with latent power and divine life rather than a lifeless pile of rocks. The curve was a masterstroke of artistic empathy, making the architecture feel organic, responsive, and most importantly, alive. This pursuit of perfect human-proportioned harmony extended to the entire temple's plan. The ratio of the length to the width, the height of the columns to the space between them, all of these relationships were derived from the same mathematical principles that the Greeks believed governed the ideal human form. They were crafting a sacred space that a person could intuitively understand and feel at home within because its proportions echoed their own. Walking through the colonnade of a Greek temple was, in a very real sense, like walking among a forest of idealized stone bodies, a community of perfect forms that represented humanity's highest potential. The temple was a mirror reflecting back at the worshipper not who they were, but who they could aspire to be. Balanced, strong, graceful, and eternally connected to the divine order of the cosmos. This architectural mirroring extended far beyond single temples pointing at sacred mountains or solstices. The ancient Greeks orchestrated their entire sacred landscapes to reflect the heavens above. Hidden meaning number 13 reveals that entire temple complexes were meticulously arranged to form constellations on Earth, creating a breathtaking map of the sky carved into the very soil of Greece. The most profound example of this is the Acropolis in Athens, where the arrangement of its major temples is believed to deliberately mirror the pattern of stars in the constellation Virgo, a star group held sacred to the city's patron goddess Athena. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a profound declaration that the gods had literally descended to these specific hallowed locations, anchoring their celestial power in the physical world. To understand the sheer ambition of this, picture the Acropolis not as a random collection of beautiful buildings, but as a deliberate, large-scale diagram. The Erechtheion, the Parthenon, the Temple of Athena Nike, and the massive statue of Athena Promachos, each structure is thought to correspond to a key star in the Virgo constellation. The Parthenon, the largest and most dominant temple, would represent the brightest star, Spica. This celestial earthly correspondence created a powerful spiritual circuit. The Greeks believed that by building their most sacred sites in the precise pattern of a god's associated constellation, they were creating a permanent, earthly dwelling place for that divine power. It was a form of sympathetic magic on a colossal scale, an attempt to bind the chaotic forces of the earth to the perfect, predictable order of the cosmos. This practice transformed the act of worship into a form of cosmic participation. A citizen attending a festival on the Acropolis wasn't just walking between temples, they were literally walking across a star map. Their prayers and rituals were performed on a stage that was a direct reflection of the heavens, making every offering and every chant feel intrinsically more powerful and more likely to be heard. It reinforced the core Greek belief that their polis, their city-state, was not a mere human invention but a divinely sanctioned project, its sacred heart laid out according to a celestial blueprint. The architecture served as permanent, undeniable proof that the gods had chosen this place, guiding human hands to build a home for them that echoed their own home in the night sky. This grand design ensured that the community's identity was forever intertwined with the cosmos, their greatest achievements on Earth forever reflecting the eternal patterns of the divine. But to truly access the divine, the ancient Greeks knew they sometimes had to descend not just spiritually, but physically. This brings us to our 14th hidden meaning, the secret chambers and underground passages built directly into the foundations of their most sacred sites. These weren't mere storage rooms or structural necessities. They were deeply symbolic portals representing a direct connection to the chthonic powers of the earth and the hidden, esoteric knowledge that was believed to reside there, accessible only to the chosen few. The most famous and powerful of these spaces was the Aditon, the forbidden inner sanctum buried deep within the temple of Apollo at Delphi. Picture the journey of a seeker arriving at Delphi. After a long, arduous climb up the sacred way, they would finally enter the temple's main hall, but their destination lay even deeper. Through a hidden doorway, a set of narrow stairs descended into a small, enclosed chamber cut into the living rock of the mountain, the Aditon. This was the heart of the entire oracle, a place so holy that only the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo, and a few assisting priests were ever allowed to enter. For everyone else, it was strictly off-limits, a place of mystery and potent, unseen power. The very word Aditon translates to the inaccessible or the not to be entered, reinforcing its role as a boundary between the known world and the realm of secrets. The purpose of this underground chamber was far more than just privacy. It was a carefully engineered spiritual device. Ancient sources describe a strange, sweet-smelling vapor or pneuma that would rise from a fissure in the rock floor of the Aditon. The Pythia would seat herself on a tripod directly over this crack, inhale these fumes, and enter a controlled trance state. In this altered consciousness, she would deliver the cryptic prophecies that kings and commoners alike traveled across the known world to receive. The geological reality behind this is fascinating. Modern research suggests the fumes could have been ethylene, a sweet-smelling gas with anesthetic properties that can induce a trance-like state. The architects of Delphi didn't just find this fissure by accident. They built their entire temple complex around it, designing the Aditon to harness and concentrate this natural phenomenon. This architectural choice carried immense symbolic weight. By placing the source of prophecy underground, the Greeks were making a profound statement about the nature of divine knowledge. The vapors rising from the earth represented the wisdom of the underworld, the hidden knowledge of the dead, and the primordial forces that existed before the Olympian gods. Apollo, though a god of light and reason, was thus directly connected to these ancient chthonic powers. The Aditon served as the literal intersection where the celestial rationality of Apollo met the raw, chaotic wisdom of the earth. It was an architectural bridge between the upper and lower worlds, a physical manifestation of the belief that true wisdom requires embracing both light and shadow, the conscious and the unconscious. The hidden chamber ensured that the most powerful, world-altering communications from the gods remained shrouded in mystery, their source protected and their power undiluted by the full understanding of the masses. For the ancient Greeks, numbers held a power that went far beyond simple counting or measurement. They were the very language of the cosmos, a divine code that could reveal the hidden order of the universe. This brings us to our 15th hidden meaning, the intricate use of symbolic number patterns woven directly into the fabric of their temples. The number of columns across a facade or the count of metopes along a side was rarely an arbitrary decision made for aesthetic balance alone. These numbers were a secret script, a way to encode profound philosophical and astronomical knowledge into the structure itself, making the temple a permanent repository of sacred wisdom. Take, for example, the almost mystical recurrence of the number 8 in the frontal column counts of many major temples, such as the Temple of Poseidon at Saunion or the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. In Greek numerology, the number 8 was profoundly significant. It represented stability, balance, and cosmic harmony. This symbolism stems from its mathematical properties. It is the first cube, 2 times 2 times 2, a number that stands solidly on all sides. Furthermore, it was associated with the harmony of the spheres, the 8 celestial bodies known to circle the Earth in the ancient Greek model of the universe. By designing a temple with 8 columns at its entrance, the architects were making a powerful statement. They were asserting that this building was a microcosm, a perfect, stable, and harmonious reflection of the entire ordered cosmos. A worshipper passing through those 8 columns was symbolically stepping out of the chaotic mortal world and into a space of divine balance and universal order. But the numerical encoding didn't stop there. Look up at the entablature of a temple like the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, and you would count a specific number of metopes, the sculpted panels depicting mythical battles. On its long sides, this temple famously featured 13 metopes. This number is no coincidence. The lunar calendar, which was crucial for determining the timing of religious festivals and agricultural cycles, is based on the moon's 13 cycles in a solar year. 13 is the number of full moons. By echoing this celestial rhythm in the temple's architecture, the builders were grounding the building in the cyclical, eternal time of nature. Each metope, in a sense, could represent a lunar month, and the entire frieze told a story not just of heroes but of the passing of a year. This transformed the temple from a static building into a kind of eternal clock, its very design tracking the sacred, repeating patterns of the heavens. The most sophisticated temples wove these numerical threads into a complex tapestry. The Parthenon is a masterclass in this practice. Its short sides have 8 columns, reinforcing that theme of cosmic harmony. Its long sides, however, feature 17 columns. While 17 might not seem immediately symbolic, its power emerges in the relationship between numbers. The ratio of the Parthenon's length to its width is a precise 9:4. This 4:9 ratio is then echoed throughout the entire structure. If you multiply the number of columns on the short side by the number on the long side, you get 8 times 17, which equals 136. The number of metopes encircling the temple, 92. It has been proposed that these numbers, 136 and 92, are not random. They could be tied to complex astronomical cycles, such as the relationship between the solar year and longer celestial periods. The architects were likely using these numbers to encode a far more advanced understanding of mathematics and astronomy than we often credit them with, turning the Parthenon into a massive, 3-dimensional textbook for those who could read the numerical language. This wasn't decoration, it was a permanent, stone-hewn record of their knowledge, ensuring that even if papyrus scrolls were lost to time, their cosmic understanding would endure for millennia. Yet for all their mathematical perfection, the ancient Greek builders understood a profound and very human truth. What is mathematically correct does not always look correct to the human eye. This brings us to our 16th hidden meaning, a breathtakingly sophisticated application of optical illusions and perceptual engineering. The architects were not just engineers and artists, they were masters of human psychology, deliberately incorporating subtle curves and inclinations that tricked the eye into seeing a perfection that literal, straight lines could never achieve. The most stunning example of this is once again the Parthenon, a building that is famously not a single straight line or perfect right angle, yet looks more perfectly rectilinear than any structure ever built. Look at the massive platform, the stylobate, upon which the Parthenon stands. If you were to place a perfectly straight edge along its length, you would discover something astonishing. It curves. It rises gently in the middle by about 2.5 inches on the long sides and 1.5 inches on the short sides. This curvature is so subtle that it is invisible to the naked eye, yet its effect is monumental. Without this upward bow, our brains would perceive a perfectly flat surface as appearing to sag in the center under the immense weight of the temple, an optical illusion known as intosses on a horizontal plane. By building in this counter-curve, the architects preemptively corrected for our flawed perception, creating the overwhelming visual impression of unwavering, solid flatness. The platform doesn't just seem strong, it seems supernaturally, defiantly level, as if defying gravity itself. Now direct your gaze upward to the forest of columns. Each one appears perfectly vertical, standing straight and true, but take precise measurements and you'll find that every single column actually leans inward by a minute amount. The corner columns are even more complex. They are not only tilted inward but also slightly thickened in diameter to counteract the bright Athenian sunlight that would otherwise make them appear thinner and weaker than their neighbors. This collective, subtle inward tilt serves a powerful purpose. If the columns were truly straight, they would appear to be leaning outward, creating a sense that the entire structure was bulging and on the verge of collapsing outwards. By tilting them inward, the architects created a powerful visual convergence. The columns appear to stand straighter, and the entire temple feels as though it is drawing itself inward, focusing its energy and strength toward the center, making the massive marble building feel cohesive, unified, and dynamically stable. The genius of this perceptual engineering lies in its goal. It wasn't about deceiving the viewer in a cheap way. It was about creating a higher form of truth, an idealized reality that matched the perfect, ordered universe the Greeks believed in. Their philosophy held that the cosmos was geometrically perfect, but human senses were imperfect and easily fooled. Therefore, to create a building that felt truly perfect and divine to a human observer, they had to deliberately build in errors that counteracted the errors of human sight. This represents one of the most profound marriages of mathematical truth and human experience in history. The Parthenon is not perfect according to a draftsman's ruler, it is perfect according to the soul. It is a building designed not for the gods who would see its true mathematical form, but for mortals who needed to experience that divinity through their own flawed, beautiful perception. It is the ultimate act of artistic empathy, a structure that bends reality itself to make us feel the harmony and balance that we could not otherwise see. Just as the architecture itself was encoded with meaning, the very path a worshipper took to reach the temple was a carefully designed part of the spiritual experience. This is our 17th hidden meaning, the profound symbolism of the ritual pathway. The journey to a sacred site was never meant to be a simple walk. It was a physical reenactment of a mythological journey, a form of walking meditation that psychologically prepared the individual to step out of the mundane world and into the presence of the divine. The most famous of these, the Sacred Way to Eleusis, was a 20-kilometer pilgrimage that transformed a geographic distance into a profound spiritual ascent. Those initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries, the most secretive and revered religious rites of the ancient world, did not simply arrive at the temple. They embarked on a collective march from the heart of Athens to the sanctuary of Demeter and Persephone at Eleusis. This was not a direct route, it was a winding path that paused at specific shrines and sacred spots along the way. At each stop, the participants would engage in specific rituals, recitations, and purifications. The physical exertion of the long walk, combined with the fasting and ceremonies, induced a state of heightened awareness and exhaustion, breaking down their everyday consciousness. They were symbolically retracing the journey of the goddess Demeter as she wandered the earth in grief after the abduction of her daughter Persephone. By walking in her footsteps, the initiates were not just learning her story, they were physically embodying her pain, her search, and her ultimate joy at reunion. The pathway itself was a narrative, and by the time they reached the great telesterion or initiation hall at Eleusis, they were psychologically primed to receive the ultimate revelations of the mysteries. This principle of the transformative approach was applied on a smaller, but no less powerful, scale at the Acropolis in Athens. The climb to the top was not a casual stroll. A worshipper would first have to navigate the bustling agora, the center of civic and commercial life, representing the human world. They would then pass through the Propylaea, the immense fortified gateway that served as the literal and symbolic threshold. This grand entrance, with its rows of columns and split into different wings, functioned as a psychological airlock. It marked a clear boundary. Behind you lay the city of man, ahead lay the city of the gods. The final ascent was a steep, winding path that revealed the temples only gradually from specific, dramatic angles. You couldn't see the entire Parthenon at once. It was unveiled piece by piece, building a sense of anticipation and awe. This carefully choreographed reveal was a masterstroke of spiritual theater. The pathway forced a shift in perspective, both physical and mental. With every step upward, the worshipper was leaving the concerns of daily life further behind, both literally and metaphorically. The physical effort of the climb, the change in air, and the expanding view over Athens all contributed to a feeling of transition. By the time one stood on the sacred rock, surrounded by the dazzling white and colored marble of the temples, the psychological transformation was complete. The individual was no longer just a citizen. They were a devotee, humbled and elevated simultaneously, fully prepared to offer prayers to a goddess who now felt tangibly or inspiringly present. The pathway was the essential first ritual, the necessary journey that made the destination truly sacred. Beyond the geometry and the gods, the very stone from which these temples were carved was chosen with profound symbolic intention. Our 18th hidden meaning reveals that the specific marble selected for each part of a temple was far more than a simple building material. It was a carefully considered element that connected the structure to the landscape, the deities, and even the time of day. The Greeks saw stone not as inert matter, but as an embodiment of the earth's spirit, and by sourcing it from specific, sacred quarries, they infused their architecture with a deeper layer of mythological and divine resonance. The most famous example is the brilliant, gleaming white marble quarried from Mount Pentelicus, northeast of Athens. This wasn't just a pragmatic choice based on proximity. Pentelic marble possesses a unique physical property. It contains tiny traces of iron. When first quarried, the stone has a pristine white appearance. But as it is exposed to the elements over centuries, this iron slowly oxidizes, giving the marble a soft, warm, honey-golden patina. The architects of the Acropolis knew this. They intentionally oriented the Parthenon so that the first rays of the rising sun would strike its eastern facade. At that precise moment, the warm glow of the sunrise would interact with the inherent warmth of the marble, causing the entire temple to ignite with a radiant, ethereal golden light. For a worshipper witnessing this spectacle, it would have seemed as if the temple itself was being born from the light of the new day, a tangible manifestation of Athena's wisdom literally dawning upon the city. The stone was chosen not just to build a temple, but to perform a daily miracle of light, forever tying the building to the solar cycle and the dawn. For the most sacred element of all, the cult statue of the deity itself, a different marble was required, one with almost magical properties. This led sculptors to the famed quarries on the island of Paros. Parian marble was legendary in the ancient world, renowned for its exceptionally fine grain and its semi-translucent quality. Unlike the opaque white of other marbles, Parian marble has a waxy, luminous character. Light penetrates its surface slightly before being reflected back out. In the dim, flickering light of a temple's inner chamber, a colossal statue carved from Parian marble would have appeared to glow with a soft, internal radiance. The deep-cut folds of a god's robe wouldn't cast harsh, dark shadows, but would instead hold a mysterious, luminous depth. This created the uncanny and powerful illusion that the statue was not a representation of the god, but a vessel actually inhabited by the divine presence, radiating a supernatural light from within. The choice of stone was fundamental to achieving this spiritual effect, transforming a masterfully carved piece of rock into a seemingly living, breathing entity. This deliberate selection process created a powerful symbolic chain connecting the temple to the wider world. A statue of Apollo in his temple might be carved from Parian marble, but the columns that housed him were of local Pentelic stone. This material dialogue spoke of a connection between the pan-Hellenic nature of the god and the specific identity of the Athenian polis. Furthermore, by using stone from a specific mountain or island, the architects were drawing a direct line from the earthly realm to the divine. The temple was not an alien structure imposed upon the landscape. It was the landscape itself, refined and elevated to its highest spiritual purpose. The very rock of Attica was being used to honor the gods of Attica, creating a perfect closed loop of piety and identity. The material was the message, a silent sermon in stone about belonging, divinity, and the sacred nature of the earth itself. We now arrive at a layer of mathematical encoding so subtle and brilliant, it borders on the mystical. Beyond the more visible golden ratio, the architects embedded fundamental constants of the universe directly into the temple's most basic dimensions. This is hidden meaning 19, the presence of mathematical constants like pi in the very proportions of the building. These weren't merely decorative numbers, they were considered the divine language of creation itself, and by weaving them into the fabric of their temples, the Greeks were asserting that these structures were literal extensions of cosmic law. The most stunning example involves the irrational number pi, approximately 3.14159, which represents the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. You would expect to find pi in circular structures, but the Greeks found a breathtakingly clever way to encode it into a rectangular temple. Look at the ground plan of the Parthenon. Researchers and archaeologists have long noted that the length of the stylobate, the top step forming the temple's platform, is related to its width through a calculation that yields pi. One compelling theory suggests that if you take the width of the temple and use it as the diameter of an imaginary circle, the length of the stylobate is exactly equal to the circumference of that circle. It's a geometric sleight of hand that transforms a rectangle into a circle, embedding the most important constant of circular geometry into a structure with straight lines and right angles. This encoding of pi is no casual coincidence. It required an extraordinarily sophisticated understanding of geometry. The builders were likely using a technique known as quadrature, the process of finding a square with the same area as a given circle, or vice versa. This was a classic problem in Greek mathematics, and the temple's proportions suggest they were solving it architecturally. By creating a building whose length and width held this specific pi-based relationship, they were making a profound philosophical statement. The circle represented the divine, the eternal, and the heavenly sphere, perfect and infinite. The square represented the earthly, the mortal, and the tangible world ordered but finite. The Parthenon, through this hidden mathematical trick, became the perfect fusion of both. A square building that contained the essence of a circle, a mortal structure imbued with immortal, divine principles. It was the cosmos in microcosm, a perfect marriage of heaven and earth achieved not through prayer but through precision engineering. The golden ratio phi appears with even greater frequency, governing relationships that are felt more than seen. While we already discussed its role in the facade, its presence extends into the most intimate details. The relationship between the height of a column and the distance between columns, or the width of the inner chamber to its length, often resolves to a ratio of 1 to 1.618. This creates a recursive harmony where every part of the temple feels connected to every other part through this divine proportion. The choice to use these constants was a deliberate act of worship. The Greeks believed the cosmos was not a chaotic accident but a beautifully ordered system, a cosmos whose rules could be expressed through mathematics. Therefore, a temple built with these same mathematical rules didn't just honor the gods, it physically participated in the same divine order that governed the movement of the planets and the growth of a seashell. The building itself was a testament to a rational, knowable universe and humanity's ability to comprehend and celebrate its underlying beauty. This mastery of light and shadow extends far beyond static alignment, evolving into a dynamic form of architectural storytelling. For our 20th hidden meaning, we discover that Greek architects were not just builders but directors of a celestial play, using the sun as their spotlight and stone as their stage to create breathtaking, time-sensitive narratives. The positioning of temples like the exquisite temple of Athena Nike on the Acropolis was calculated with such precision that on specific, hallowed days of the year, the rising or setting sun would perform a miraculous dance across its surface, illuminating chosen sculptures and carving dramatic shadows that brought ancient myths to life in real time. The small but powerful temple of Athena Nike, perched on the edge of the Acropolis bastion, offers a perfect case study in this divine choreography. Its delicate Ionic columns and famous parapet, adorned with reliefs of Nike figures, were not arranged arbitrarily. Archaeologists and archaeoastronomers have found compelling evidence that its orientation was deliberately set so that on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year and a pivotal moment in the agricultural and religious calendar, the first rays of the rising sun would strike the temple's eastern face at a very specific, low angle. This glancing light would dramatically illuminate particular scenes on the frieze, most likely those depicting Athena presiding over a divine assembly or receiving homage from other gods. As the sun climbed higher, the sharp, elongated shadows would retreat and shift, creating a moving tableau that unfolded over the course of the morning. For Athenians gathered for the solstice ceremonies, this was not a passive observation. It was an active, participatory event. They would witness the light seemingly choose the figure of their patron goddess, emphasizing her power and presence at the precise moment the city celebrated its connection to her. It was a yearly reaffirmation written in sunlight that Athena favored Athens. This sophisticated use of shadow play served a profound dual purpose, blending the practical with the deeply spiritual. On one level, these precise solar alignments functioned as an incredibly accurate, immovable civic calendar carved directly into the cityscape. The specific date when the light hit a certain marker on the temple of Athena Nike would signal the official start of the summer season, dictating the timing for harvests, maritime trade voyages, and major festivals like the Parthenon. It was a public timekeeping device of immense reliability, ensuring the entire polis operated in sync with the cosmic cycle. On a far deeper psychological level, these effects engineered a sense of awe and tangible connection to the divine that mere statues could never achieve. A shadow is ephemeral and alive, it moves and changes. When worshippers saw the shadow of a sculpted god seem to reach out or grow to immense proportions as the sun moved, it broke the boundary between stone representation and living deity. It created the powerful illusion that the god was present and active, interacting with the temple and by extension with the people witnessing the event. This transformed the temple from a static house of worship into a dynamic participant in the ritual itself. The architecture, through its manipulation of light, became a medium for the miraculous, a permanent machine designed to capture a moment of cosmic magic and make the invisible power of the gods visible to all. It was the ultimate expression of the Greek belief that the divine was not separate from the natural world, but was its most brilliant and active force. Step inside the inner sanctum of a Greek temple, the naos, and you enter a space designed not just to house a statue, but to transform consciousness itself. This brings us to our 21st hidden meaning, the harmonic proportions of the inner chamber. The architects who so carefully calibrated the temple's exterior applied that same mathematical genius to its most sacred interior space, believing that specific dimensional ratios could actually tune the chamber to the frequency of the divine. These weren't arbitrary measurements, they were calculated to create sonic and spatial harmonics that would facilitate a deeper, more resonant connection between the worshipper and the deity, turning the entire room into a kind of spiritual instrument. The guiding principle here was the ancient Greek concept of harmonia, which meant a joining or fitting together, a perfect unification of parts into a concordant whole. This idea was central to their philosophy, music, and astronomy. They observed that certain mathematical ratios produced perfectly consonant musical intervals. For instance, a ratio of 2:1 gives us the octave, the most fundamental and pleasing interval in music. A ratio of 3:2 creates the perfect fifth, and 4:3 gives the perfect fourth. The Greeks believed these weren't just pleasant sounds, they were the fundamental mathematical building blocks of the cosmos itself, the very ratios that governed the harmonious movement of the planets, what they called the music of the spheres. Architects deliberately designed the dimensions of the naos to embody these sacred musical ratios. The height of the chamber to its width or the length to the height would often be set to a precise ratio like 3:2 or 4:3. A visitor wouldn't consciously hear a chord, but they would feel the effect. A space built on the ratio of a perfect fifth feels inherently balanced, harmonious, and complete. It creates an environment of subliminal order that stands in stark contrast to the unpredictable chaos of the outside world. This wasn't mere decoration. It was a form of architectural psychoacoustics, engineering an atmosphere of profound peace and receptivity that was considered the ideal state for prayer and communion. This practice finds a powerful example in the Parthenon's own inner chamber, which housed the colossal gold and ivory statue of Athena Parthenos. While the entire temple is a masterpiece of the 4:9 ratio, the cella's own proportions are believed to have followed this harmonic principle as well. The goal was to make the chamber a resonant vessel for the divine presence of the statue. In a space tuned to a perfect interval, even the quiet chanting of priests or the whispered prayers of initiates would have been subtly enhanced, their voices given a faint, almost imperceptible richness and clarity by the room's own natural acoustics. This would create an uncanny sensation that the space itself was participating in the worship, amplifying human devotion and making it more pleasing to the divine ear. The temple wasn't just a home for a god, it was an amplifier for prayer, a finely tuned receiver designed to better catch the signal of the divine and to broadcast the hopes of humanity back into the cosmos. The ancient Greeks didn't just build their temples to be spiritually resilient, they engineered them to physically withstand the very wrath of the gods they honored. This brings us to our 22nd hidden meaning, a brilliant fusion of geological wisdom and seismic engineering, where practical survival tactics were masterfully presented as tangible proof of divine protection. The builders understood that their sacred structures, meant to stand for eternity, had to be rooted in the most stable ground and designed to dance with the earth itself when it trembled. Their solution was so advanced that it continues to inform modern earthquake engineering, yet to the ancient worshipper, it could only be interpreted as the miraculous hand of a deity sheltering their hallowed home. This profound understanding began with the very selection of the site. Before a single stone was laid, builders conducted what we would now call a geological survey. They sought out massive, stable outcrops of bedrock known as horos to serve as the foundation. The Acropolis in Athens is the ultimate example, a towering, monolithic block of limestone that has resisted seismic shocks for millennia. By anchoring their most important temples directly to this unshakable base, the architects ensured the structures moved as one with the bedrock during an earthquake, rather than shearing apart on unstable soil. This wasn't just good construction, it was a symbolic statement. The temple was literally and metaphorically rooted to the eternal, unchanging heart of the earth, a physical manifestation of permanence in a volatile world. For the citizenry, the fact that their temples survived when ordinary homes crumbled was not seen as clever engineering, but as direct evidence that Zeus or Poseidon was holding his own house steady. But their genius truly shines in the architectural details designed to absorb and dissipate seismic energy. Look closely at the individual blocks of a temple like the Temple of Poseidon at Saunion, a god famously associated with earth-shaking power. The builders employed a technique known as anathyrosis, where they would only painstakingly polish the outer edges of a marble block that would make contact with its neighbor. The center of the joining surface was left slightly concave and rough. This created an incredibly strong, weight-bearing joint along the edges, while the hollow center allowed for tiny, microscopic movements during a tremor. The blocks could shift and settle without cracking, acting like a sophisticated shock absorption system. Furthermore, the columns themselves were not mortared together. Each drum was connected only by a central wooden or metal peg called an empoleon, set in lead to prevent rust. During an earthquake, this entire assembly could sway and flex like a grove of trees in the wind, the individual drums rocking gently against each other before settling back into perfect alignment once the shaking stopped. The psychological impact of this engineering was immense. When a powerful quake struck and a community saw their homes damaged while the great temple on the hill remained steadfast, the message was unmistakable. The priests could and did point to this survival as irrefutable proof of their god's active protection. It wasn't that the earth had shaken, it was that their god had calmed the earth just enough to spare his own dwelling, demonstrating his power and his favor to his devoted people. This transformed a terrifying natural disaster into a reaffirmation of faith. The temple's resilience was the ultimate divine propaganda, a stone and marble argument for the potency of the deity within. The sophisticated science of the builders, hidden in plain sight, became the greatest miracle of all, ensuring that the house of the god would not just be a beautiful symbol, but an enduring, unshakable fortress that would forever testify to his power. Even the smallest decorative elements on a Greek temple were rarely just for show. They were often a secret language of the stars, meticulously carved into stone. Our 23rd hidden meaning reveals that patterns like the triglyphs and metopes on a Doric frieze, and the intricate rosettes found elsewhere, functioned as sophisticated astronomical markers, encoding celestial cycles and mapping the night sky directly onto the sacred architecture. This transformed the temple from a static building into a permanent, public record of the cosmos, allowing every citizen to track time and navigate by the heavens simply by gazing at the walls. Take the most distinctive feature of the Doric order, the alternating pattern of triglyphs and metopes that runs around the entire temple. A triglyph is a vertically grooved rectangular block, while a metope is the blank square panel between them, often filled with sculpted reliefs. While their structural purpose was to represent the ends of wooden beams from earlier building traditions, their arrangement was far from arbitrary. Scholars have observed that on many major Doric temples, the number of triglyphs in a single circuit often corresponds to a significant lunar number. For instance, a count of 32 triglyphs is not uncommon. This number is powerfully symbolic. It's very close to the 33 visible risings of a crescent moon in a single lunar month from a fixed observation point. Furthermore, the total number of metopes encircling a temple could represent the number of months in a year or a longer celestial cycle. This wasn't a mere coincidence, it was a deliberate encoding. As the sun moved across the facade throughout the day, casting shifting shadows from the deeply cut grooves of the triglyphs, it would have created a dynamic, moving clock and calendar. The alternating pattern of light and dark, of projection and recession, became a stone metaphor for the eternal cycle of the moon itself, waxing, waning, and renewing in an endless rhythm echoed by the temple's design. Beyond the lunar calendar, the Greeks also mapped specific stars and constellations onto their temples using more intricate decorations, particularly the rosette. A rosette is a circular, flower-like ornament, often carved with a precise number of petals. In the sanctuaries of gods associated with specific celestial bodies, the pattern of these rosettes could be a direct diagram of a star cluster. The most compelling potential example involves the Pleiades, a famous star cluster also known as the Seven Sisters, which was immensely important in Greek mythology, agriculture, and navigation. The heliacal rising of the Pleiades, their first appearance in the dawn sky after a period of invisibility, marked the start of the sailing season and the time for harvesting. A rosette with 7 distinct petals arranged in a specific cluster pattern could easily represent this critical asterism. Placed in a strategic location on a temple dedicated to a maritime god like Poseidon or a goddess like Artemis, this rosette would serve as a permanent, stone-made nautical almanac, a reminder etched in marble of when it was safe to set sail. This architectural practice served a vital purpose beyond the symbolic. It was a fundamental tool for civic and agricultural life. In an era before printed calendars or portable timepieces, the temple was the community's most reliable public clock and calendar. A farmer wondering when to plant his crops could look at the progression of shadows across the metopes and get a rough idea of the month. A sailor contemplating a voyage could look at the rosettes on the temple of Poseidon and know whether the season dictated by the stars had arrived. By embedding this knowledge directly into the most prominent and durable structure in the city, the Greeks ensured that this critical information was accessible to all, forever preserved against the loss of fragile scrolls or the failings of human memory. The temple became a teacher, its walls offering silent, perpetual lessons in astronomy, mythology, and survival, ensuring the community remained forever in sync with the divine clockwork of the universe. Even the stone itself could speak a secret language if you knew how to read it. Beyond the grand sculptures and perfect proportions, the ancient Greeks embedded a final layer of mystery into the very documents meant to record the mundane details of construction. This is our 24th hidden meaning, the concealed symbolism within temple inscriptions. The marble slabs that listed expenses, inventory, and work crew salaries were far more than simple accounting ledgers. To the initiated, they were complex cryptographic puzzles, encoding geometric secrets and preserving advanced mathematical knowledge in plain sight, disguised as bureaucratic record-keeping. The most fascinating evidence of this comes from the detailed construction accounts of the Parthenon itself, inscribed on marble stelae that were publicly displayed for all to see. On the surface, these inscriptions are intensely practical. They meticulously record the cost of everything from the wages paid to the sculptor who gilded the statue of Athena's spear tip to the price of the oxen that hauled the marble blocks from Mount Pentelicus. They list the dimensions of specific elements, like the length of a beam or the height of a column drum. To the average Athenian citizen, this was a transparent accounting of public funds, a demonstration of the state's integrity in managing the vast expense of the project. But for the architects and mathematicians involved, these lists of numbers were something else entirely, a public archive of their sacred geometrical principles. Researchers have discovered that when you take the numerical data from these inscriptions, the specific measurements of architectural elements, and plot them out geometrically, they don't just describe random parts. They resolve into perfect, interrelated shapes and patterns. A series of seemingly disparate column height and spacing measurements might, when understood as part of a ratio, form the precise components needed to construct a golden rectangle. The cost of materials for different sections, when converted into their proportional equivalents, could reveal the steps for solving a classic problem of quadrature, the squaring of a circle. This was a brilliant method of knowledge preservation. By embedding these mathematical truths into the permanent public record of the state, the builders ensured that this sacred geometry would survive wars, fires, or the loss of fragile papyrus scrolls. The knowledge was set in stone, waiting centuries for someone with the key to come along and interpret it. This practice transforms our understanding of these inscriptions. They were not just receipts, they were textbooks. They served a dual audience. For the public and the officials, they provided accountability and a record of civic achievement. For the inner circle of architects and philosophers, they were a permanent library of esoteric knowledge, a way to pass on the complex geometric and harmonic rules that governed their art to future generations of master builders. The inscriptions became a lasting dialogue between the pragmatic needs of the city and the transcendent search for cosmic order, proving that for the ancient Greeks, even the most mundane list of numbers could be a prayer to the mathematical gods. This profound connection culminates in our final hidden meaning, the seamless integration of these sacred structures with the natural landscapes that cradled them. The Greeks did not seek to conquer nature with their architecture. Instead, they aspired to a perfect marriage between human creation and the divine earth, designing their temples to appear as natural extensions of the very mountains and seas that surrounded them. This was the ultimate expression of their worldview, a harmonious triad of humanity, nature, and the gods, all existing in a balanced, beautiful whole. The temple was the point where these three realms met and merged into one. We see this philosophy executed with breathtaking precision in the strategic placement of temples to capture specific, awe-inspiring vistas. The Temple of Poseidon at Saunion is perhaps the most dramatic example, perched on the sheer cliffs of Cape Saunion, thrusting out into the Aegean Sea. The architects didn't just build a temple near the water. They engineered the experience so that the spaces between the majestic Doric columns perfectly framed the boundless expanse of the sea. For a worshipper of Poseidon, the god of the oceans, this was a transcendent moment. Your view of the crashing waves below was literally structured and bordered by the man-made columns, creating a living painting that changed with every passing cloud and shifting wave. You weren't just looking at the sea, you were seeing it through the god's own house, a constant visual reminder that this entire domain was his. The architecture became a picture frame for divine power, ensuring that nature itself was an integral part of the religious experience. This dialogue with the landscape extended to the most powerful symbol of all, the distant cloud-wreathed peak of Mount Olympus, the legendary home of the gods. Temples across mainland Greece, particularly those in Thessaly and Macedonia, were carefully oriented so that from specific ritual vantage points within the sanctuary, the peak of Olympus would be visible, often framed by the temple's own architecture. This was no happy accident of geography. It was a deliberate symbolic alignment. The temple on earth was creating a direct sightline to the home of the gods in the sky. This visual connection served as a permanent, physical anchor for faith. It made the abstract concept of the gods tangible and immediate. A priest making an offering on an altar would not just be praying to an invisible Zeus in a vague heaven. He would be performing the ritual with the god's actual dwelling place in his direct line of sight. This transformed prayer from a hope into a conversation, bridging the immense distance between the mortal and the immortal with a single, unbroken gaze. This meticulous integration reveals the deepest layer of the Greek architectural genius. They understood that true divinity was not confined within the walls of a building. The god was in the mountain, in the sea, in the sky. The temple's purpose, therefore, was not to contain the divine, but to be a focal point, a sacred instrument that directed human attention toward the manifestations of the divine that were already present throughout the natural world. By framing the sea or highlighting a mountain, the architects were teaching people how to see the world through sacred eyes. They were showing them that the boundary between the natural and the supernatural was an illusion. The temple was the lens that brought this fundamental truth into focus, a masterpiece of design that didn't stand against nature, but rather knelt in reverence to it, inviting humanity to do the same. So as we've journeyed through these 25 hidden layers, a stunningly complete picture comes into focus. These structures were never merely beautiful houses for the gods. They were the ancient world's most ambitious and sophisticated project, an attempt to encode the entire universe into stone. Each temple was, in its own right, a multidimensional text, a library of knowledge written not in ink, but in proportion, alignment, and sacred geometry. Think of everything we've uncovered. They were cosmic models, their floor plans and column counts mapping the stars and the harmonious music of the spheres. They were scientific instruments, functioning as immense calendars that tracked solstices and lunar cycles with breathtaking precision. They were philosophical statements, their very forms arguing for a universe governed by mathematical order and reason, a cosmos they called the cosmos. They were psychological engines using controlled light, sound, and choreographed pathways to orchestrate profound spiritual experiences. And they were declarations of identity, their sculptures teaching civic values and their stone sourced from sacred mountains to root a community's soul in the landscape. This means that to walk among these ruins today is to walk through the pages of a vast, interdisciplinary encyclopedia. Every choice, from the curve of a column to the color of a pigment, was a deliberate word in this architectural language. The Parthenon is not just a monument to Athena, it is a lecture on mathematics, a treatise on astronomy, and a meditation on the ideal human form, all simultaneously. The Temple of Apollo at Delphi is not just a home for the oracle. It is a geological observatory, a psychological theater, and a direct portal to the underworld. This revelation completely transforms our relationship with the past. It argues that our ancestors were not primitive or superstitious, but rather brilliant scientists, engineers, and philosophers who chose to express their deepest understanding of reality through the most permanent medium they had. They looked at the chaos of the natural world and saw an underlying order, and then they spent generations laboring to carve that order into marble for all time. They left us a challenge, an invitation etched into every surviving stone, to look beyond the obvious beauty, to peer past the weathered surface, and to discover the profound wisdom waiting in every calculated angle, every aligned axis, and every intentional shadow. These temples are a conversation across millennia, and now we are finally beginning to understand the complex and magnificent language in which they speak. Now that we've walked through these 25 layers of hidden meaning, I'm genuinely curious which one reshaped your perspective the most. Was it the celestial alignments that turned temples into giant stone calendars, or the sophisticated seismic engineering that made them dance with earthquakes? Maybe it was the secret language of color or the hidden water channels that brought myths to life. Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing which discoveries resonate with you. If this journey has inspired you to see these ancient sites with new eyes, consider planning a visit. Walk the sacred way in Athens or stand in the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, not just as a tourist but as a decoder of hidden messages. Look for the curve in the columns, sense the acoustic wonders, and feel the intentional harmony. You'll be stepping into a conversation between humanity, nature, and the divine that's been waiting for you for millennia. For those of you eager to dive even deeper, there's a wealth of fascinating material out there. I'd recommend starting with books like The Power of Limits by Georgi Doxy, which explores proportional harmonies in nature and art, or Sacred Geometry by Robert Lawler, which delves into the philosophical and mathematical principles the Greeks mastered. For the engineering marvels, Structure and Design in Ancient Greece by R.E. Wycherley offers brilliant insights, If you enjoyed unraveling these mysteries with me, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're just scratching the surface of history's deepest enigmas, from the astronomical precision of Egyptian pyramids to the acoustic secrets of Gothic cathedrals. This channel is all about connecting ancient wisdom to our modern understanding, revealing how the past continually speaks to our present, waiting for us to listen.